Airports company South Africa plans to hike airline navigation tariffs by 35% over a 5-year period. The International Air Transport Association has slammed ACSA of seeking high airport charges, saying this would effectively compensate for its inefficient operations. IATA said the parastatal was seeking to increase its tariffs by more than 30%. SABC News business reporter Liabo Setho spoke to ACSA CEO Mpumi Mpofu on this and a number of issues.
The underlying causes for just missing profitability this year actually emanate from high credit losses on trade receivables and fair value losses on investment property. So we are aiming to put that behind us. You would know that we had to provide credit reprieves for a lot of our operators on our platform. And that basically has come to an end. We will not be writing off any debt from our operators, but also more importantly, we won't be giving them credit reprieves. So the COVID era is over, and that contributed largely to it, will not recur in the new year. Secondly, there was an issue around fair value losses in terms of our investment properties. We've just had a problem with the occupancy levels in terms of some of our investment properties. Commercial property has not performed as it normally would have in the recovery period. And that's primarily because people are not taking up office space. And what we had done at ACSA is invest in a new office block and expecting that we would have been able to let that out. So those two underlying causes for us missing profitability this year would not be there. However, we basically are on a steady trajectory towards growth, and we're diversifying our revenue streams significantly as traffic recovers. You know, we reported this morning that we're at 76% traffic recovery compared to 2019. And as traffic recovers, I can already indicate that this year, in the first quarter of this year, we closed at 76%, but in the first quarter of this year, we're already at 82%. So it is moving very quickly, and we're hoping to actually achieve the 2019 figures in 2024. So diversification of revenue streams, sweating our assets more, that's what's going to contribute significantly to our growth and profitability as it comes. The aeronautical revenue is up. We actually indicated we're above our targets in terms of what we've achieved on aeronautical revenue and non-aeronautical revenue. You would also know that our aeronautical revenue is driven by passenger numbers, and that we've seen a steady incline on. The non-aeronautical revenue is then the commercial business that we run, which is also passenger dependent. So the two aren't exactly not related, they are interdependent. And the result is that we will see, basically, we are predicting a profit for 23-24, and we're almost certain that that's where we're going to end up, unless there's just some completely unknown that would occur during this particular year. All indicators as well in the quarter one are showing that we'll quite easily achieve that. The other important factor is that we've really managed our finances well, and we won't be needing to borrow in this particular period as well. So no debt required by us, but we promise really marginal profits, but definitely profits in 23-24.
There's also been quite a number of utterances with regards to tariffs. IATA quite not happy with the trajectory, and perhaps we could use the platform for you to clarify about what is happening with the tariffs. Have you been granted the tariffs yet?
Okay. Can I just say it's really unfortunate that the public discourse on this matter is based on false news. And let me clarify. What we do with the economic regulator is we submit an application, and that we did in November of last year. And once we've submitted the application, the economic regulator takes quite a while in assessing and then granting us a 5-year permission. What we did apply for was, because you apply for a 5-year period, we applied for 17.5 in the first year, 17.5 in the second year, 0.000 in year 3, 4, and 5. Now, that means some people will literally take that and say it's a 35% or 38% tariff increase required by ACSA. Not exactly true, because what they're missing is that it isn't an annual tariff increase that we're asking for. So if it's 35% over 5 years, that would be considered to be quite reasonable. And that basically is the ask we've made. Now, the fact that a whole IATA president makes an announcement on this based on falsehood is just beyond me. But the reality is that we've submitted an application in November. The economic regulator has not completed their process. And as a result, this is what they've done, whilst they have had delays on their side of concluding the permission process. One is they granted us for the year under review 3.1% tariff increase. That was for the year under review. They then developed something called an interim arrangement because of the delays and granted us for 23-24 4.4%. We are in the closing stages of that permission right now, and the economic regulator, subject to a whole range of government processes, including gazetting and others, will then issue a new permission for the next 5 years, excluding 23-24. And therefore, by definition, we will see that particular tariff increase being announced. The reason we applied for 17.5, which totals 35 in the first 2 years, is because this is exactly how the implementation of the CAPEX that we are permitted to implement as a result of the tariff increase operates. We front-loaded the application deliberately in order to receive the tariff sooner and then be able to implement the extensive CAPEX projects basically over the 5-year period. Let me indicate, over 3 years on our corporate plan, our CAPEX is about 3.6 billion. Over the 5 years with the permission, it jumps to a staggering 21.6 billion. That just gives you an indication why the front loading is quite important to us, because when you are to implement an extensive CAPEX program, there are long lead times, there are environmental impact assessments and a whole lot of other constraints. It is better to receive it earlier in order to conclude it within the 5-year period. However, the economic regulator will be mindful of that impact on passengers and airlines, of course, and actually has indicated they might actually use the approach of what's called smoothing over, and that basically means not front-loading the tariff, but giving us the tariff over the full 5-year period. We would welcome that, and that's quite normal, actually. So, again, we await the announcements from the economic regulator where they indicate exactly where they finalized their tariff increase request.
Do we have an indication of when we're likely to get that announcement?
Okay.
Well, let me just indicate, we think we've had our last engagements with them. The process that ensues now, and this was last week, and the process that now ensues is they go back into their own internal arrangements. They basically are accountable to the Department of Transport, and then they would take the process through their governance processes, including the Minister of Transport, including gazetting that particular tariff. So I would say months, if not sooner, but it's within months. Definitely this calendar year, for sure. That's definitely a given.
Understood. As you were making a presentation in the morning, you listed one of the constraints to operating environment as load shedding, even though you do have alternative ways of keeping the lights on. In just a few minutes ago, we just learned that actually we are going to be landing to stage 6 of load shedding. How concerning is this for yourselves as ACSA? Even though you do have backup, however, I'm sure it still has an impact somewhat in your operations here and there.
Yes, no, absolutely. It does have an impact on our operations. Firstly, outside of our environment, it impacts on everybody else. So even the movement of passengers into our platform and just basically the movement of goods and services into our platform is significantly disrupted by load shedding. On the ACSA platform and the airport precinct, we have alternative energy, particularly in the form of generators. At OR Tambo, for instance, we've got 24 generators operating. In other airports, we've got a combination of generators and solar. Our best solar airport is Uppington, as you can imagine. The weather agrees, and actually Uppington is almost exclusively solar run. Chief David Stearman, which is Gqeberha, also has a very, very healthy solar farm that actually feeds into the airport. We're expanding this to all of our regional airports and even Cape Town and Durban. But you would know that the conditions in those other places are not as favorable as Uppington is. So what normally happens with load shedding is, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, whilst we have generators that basically create the backup, with the on and off and the switching on and off and the impact on the equipment, in certain instances we face interruptions that result from our equipment failing because of just this on and off game. So in one incident, we had our international arrivals and international departures affected. And that comes from when the generators, when the load shedding ends and the generators are supposed to come back on, they don't sometimes. And that just means there are likely to be technical glitches as we experience load shedding. It happens in our houses. We see it sometimes that, the return of electricity does not necessarily guarantee that everything will operate well. But also, similarly, when load shedding happens, it doesn't necessarily mean the equipment we have will perform at 100% efficiency because of the on and off and the impact, that negative impact that it has on operational efficiency of that equipment. So in a way, I think what we're now looking at is a strategy that will help us with a healthier energy mix, so that, for instance, in OR Tambo, where we depended on electricity, switch off to generators, we're now going to add solar, and we're looking at backup batteries, so that we actually have an arsenal of options in the event of load shedding. And that's what we're going to roll out in all our airports. Our ambition is really to come off grid and ensure that that energy mix allows us to be totally self-sufficient in terms of our energy, and we think even our water services.
Just for curiosity's sake, you've mentioned that this issue of power when it comes back and it impacting on the airport systems itself. Does that by any chance cost you any money? Have you seen in your books perhaps how that impacts on your balance sheet?
No, not really. I mean, there would be instances where we have to increase our maintenance costs because of that surging back and forth. But it's also an isolated generator here, generator there. It's not significant, and we're able to cope with it quite nicely. The issue for us, though, urgently, is we've got to move to a position where the airport, because it's a national key point and because it provides critical services, is totally self-sufficient and is not affected by load shedding that comes as a result of grid failure. We have planned for day zero as well, like everybody else, which is just looking at a scenario where what would happen if the grid would collapse. And I think that as a risk mitigation has actually found useful indicators and shows us clearly in starting to make those investments in the right areas, so that, as I said, we have a arsenal of layers of options of energy alternatives in the event of either grid collapse or failure of the current grid.
As I conclude, Mr. Mpofu, what's the latest with regards to the IT tender of the online check-in system? Has that been concluded? There were murmurs and rumors about that tender not having been concluded and how that would impact on operations and flows at the various airports in which you operate.
The tender is in progress, and I think it's really quite dangerous for outsiders to be participating in debates about whether tenders are ready or not, etc. So it is in progress, and it will be concluded, and there's unlikely to be an impact on what is called CUT and CAS, the self-service elements. The real issue is that that's a tender we've taken out in order to be able to provide the service ourselves as ACSA, and initially there might not have been a responsive element, but we're well within our timeframes to ensure that there's no disruption to passenger movements or passenger services as a result of this.